So I just want to welcome everyone to this workshop. We're going to be talking about chronic illness and diet and nutrition. I want to welcome Lesley, who is a dietitian, been scouring the internet for someone who is really well qualified, because this is an area that I think we all know is filled with hearsay and rumours and people saying what they found works for them without any qualification or any proof to back them up. And we wanted to make sure that we were bringing you solid evidence-based information today. This workshop's part of a series of workshops that we've been doing. This is the last in the current series. You can catch all of our workshops over on our Patreon. You can sign up just for the month. There's no contract, but you can watch them all for the same price. We've got a whole range from pacing to sleep, a whole incredible range with really amazing speakers on there. So well worth checking out, and this workshop will go up on there as well. And if you were booked onto this workshop originally, you'll get this recording via email as well. So I'll hand over to Lesley. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ellie, for inviting me to do this workshop with you. So can you make me able to, can I share my screen? Yeah, hold on, let me share the screen.
Do you need me to do something? It's not.
Yes, you need to make me, you have to make me be able to share my screen. So you have to, because you've got that part disabled, host disabled participation of sharing screen.
Oh.
So if you go into your, so if you go into the settings.
Can I just make you the host?
Yeah, make me the host.
That's the easiest thing to do.
Yes, fabulous. Right. Let me just this and this. Okay. So can you see that okay? Yeah, there you go. So, so obviously what we're going to talk about is eating well with chronic illness. And as a bit of an overview, what I wanted to ask was, I was talking to Ellie earlier on, just before we kind of came on, and we were just talking about how complicated. So it's complicated as a dietitian to treat people that have chronic conditions, but I wanted to kind of know a bit about what diets you've maybe tried yourself. You know, did you find any success with them? You know, have you tried really anything quite out there, quite you know, something we kind of class as a fad diet? What have you both tried before with eating? Have you I think you're both mute.
I've tried like gluten-free diet, and I've got fibromyalgia.
Yeah. And did it help?
And I've got like all the associated symptoms like IBS and all of that. And I think it does help my digestive system and maybe the brain fog, but it's not like taking it off completely.
Yeah.
I've also like reduced obviously coffee.
Yeah.
And I've noticed as well, like sometimes it's also the time of the day. So like tea after 4 o'clock would tend to make me like swell like a balloon and like really give me cramps. But that's the only thing. But I wouldn't say, I was hoping, because everybody say like if you go gluten-free, well, everybody is going to change your life and everything. So I was hoping for a black and white, and it hasn't. Maybe at the beginning it did make a difference, but now in the long run, it doesn't seem to be such a big difference.
Yeah, and I think so. That's that. A lot of the time, that's what I find as well, is people will try something, and sometimes it can be the placebo effect, it can be the excitement, it can be that you're trying something new, that you begin to generally feel better. And I think, you know, if you can look at like the rise in gluten-free eating, you know, potentially over the past 10 years, it's been absolutely enormous. The amount of gluten-free foods the supermarkets have all kind of jumped on. But I think for me, there's definitely certain conditions that being gluten-free will definitely help with. But like that, I get people to do it for 4 to 6 weeks, see if there's a difference. And then potentially there's maybe a degree of challenging as well to see, you know, how much of it can you tolerate without bringing back any of your symptoms, or in 6 weeks' time, are you feeling as good as you did in the first 2 weeks? So it's hard to tell. And I think when fibromyalgia is so complicated, and you know, things like it obviously affects your sleep and your pain and your activities and all that. And I think too often sometimes we jump on that food's the issue, when in actual fact it's really important that we look at the issue as a whole. So that's we'll touch on these, but there are, you know, there's so much information out there, and what we have to do, what I want to talk today about, is really about trying to make sure that you're getting the right information, and because a lot of it isn't clinically proven, so it's very hard to do clinical trials on you know, on different conditions. So so a lot of the information is anecdotal. So it's you know, somebody will say, oh, so and so tried being gluten-free and they're a million times better. So it's like, well, how does that work for me with my chronic conditions? Because I think what I was saying to Ellie earlier on is everybody's like a fingerprint. So what works for you and the variations that work for you will be different from what works for somebody else with fibromyalgia as well. So it's very, very complicated, but it's what my advice is really is that what we want to do is make sure that whatever you're doing is as balanced as possible and sustainable for long-term health. So whether, you know, long-term gluten-free is going to be the right thing for you, but if in 8 weeks' time you're not feeling the benefit of it, it's then looking at, you know, either trying something else or bringing gluten back into your diet. But we'll talk about these things as we kind of go on. So what I'm planning to talk about is so diet and chronic illness, what's the link? Managing a chronic illness with diet, examples of different diets that are out there. I'm going to talk a bit about later on about the balance of eating and the Eatwell guide. And maybe focus a bit more on Mediterranean style eating, but again, that will just depend on what people are having to kind of eliminate from their diet. So let me so the plan I'll do today is I'll talk up until a point, and then we'll kind of have a bit of a break and maybe have a bit of a chat, and then I'll kind of talk up through a kind of case study of somebody that I've worked with, and then maybe kind of go on to talking through fad diets, and then potentially the advice for balance of good health and how do we fit that into issues that come up with having chronic conditions. So what I understand, so chronic disease is defined as broadly as conditions that last for longer than a year and require ongoing medical attention or limit activities on daily living or both. So chronic conditions are diseases of long-term duration and may result from a combination of your genetics, your physiology, the environment that you live in, and your behavioural factors. These chronic illnesses, these are just some of the issues that maybe clients attend clinic with, but the list, you know, that's only just touching on a few of the chronic illnesses that are out there. And we don't have a lot of clinical evidence, as I said already, for matching specific conditions with specific diets. And what I do find is very rarely do people just present with one condition. So quite often I'll get somebody who has celiac disease plus IBS, or I'll get somebody who's got fibromyalgia plus IBS plus diabetes plus asthma. So that's where I think everybody's a fingerprint. We have to look at you as a whole and kind of all the other things that are interplaying with it. And there are specific dietary modifications that we do know that will benefit. But again, there's ones that we know, like we definitely know that low Fodmap diet is clinically proven for IBS, but we don't know whether low Fodmap diet is of any use with gastroparesis or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or so it's difficult to again, it's like it's knowing yourself and whether we should try these things. We do know there's a big link with anti-inflammatory foods. We know that there's lots of benefits that people get from being on a Mediterranean style diet. We know that the more diverse your diet is, the better your gut microbiome is, which again can affect on your mental health and your gut health. And so there are specific ones out there that we do know work for certain conditions, but we don't know if they work for other conditions as well. But what I do understand is that the symptoms of having a chronic illness, obviously things like pain, fatigue, and nausea can affect, you know, your overall. It can affect your overall relationship with food, because obviously it'll affect your appetite. It'll affect, you know, whether you feel sick. So what I'm trying to say is it's complicated. So how chronic illness affects your nutritional status. So chronic illnesses can indirectly affect your nutritional status by, as I said earlier on, it can affect your appetite. It can interfere with hunger signals. So some people can feel hungry all the time because there's a mix up with ghrelin and leptin hormone levels, or potentially medication can affect, you know, your appetite or make you feel nauseous as well. So obviously certain conditions can decrease the body's ability to digest and absorb food. It can alter the taste and the smell. So, you know, certain conditions can affect the taste of foods, and there's nothing worse than actually just having something in your mouth that you can't smell or taste, and it just feels like cardboard, and all you're kind of working on is on textures. Obviously, there's certain conditions that can make people feel more nauseated, vomiting, wind, bloating, abdominal pain. There's certain conditions that require you to eliminate foods. So obviously being celiac, you'd have to take out gluten from your diet. Obviously, if you're diabetic, you have to be in tight control of your glucose and your sugar and your carbohydrate intake. And overall, it can have make you have a negative relationship with food. So food becomes a chore, it becomes the enemy, it becomes a reward. It's so it becomes more than you know, it kind of takes the fun out of everything. And obviously having things like fibromyalgia or ME or MS, it's about the being able to prepare foods and you know, having the energy to make what you want to eat. So you find a lot of times people will just eat something because that'll see me through. I don't have to spend a lot of time making that. So there's lots of things to consider when we've got chronic illnesses and the effect it'll have on somebody's nutritional status. So what I would say is, when I speak to clients, I tend to try to look at them as a whole and not, because as I said earlier on, quite often we're too quick to jump on the food is the issue. So when people come to see me, I map them out. So what we'll do is we'll look at their sleep pattern, we'll look at their mental health, we'll look at what are their symptoms, you know, have they got diarrhea, have they got constipation, are they bloated, windy, are they sick, what their overall lifestyle is like. So do they work, you know, 70 hours a week, have they got a busy family, you know, and also look back at their genetics, you know, what's their mum and dad, brothers and sisters genetics like. We also quite often look at, because majority of people that come to see me I work with is IBS, Crohn's, colitis, diverticulosis, so there's a lot of gut health. So I quite often will look at potentially go back as far as, you know, how they were born, what were they fed as a child, were they breastfed, because again we're looking at the whole gut microbiome, you know, where did they live, what was their environment like, what medications have they been on, have they had food poisoning episodes, their past medical history. Also we kind of delve also into potentially, has there been any emotional traumas as well, because again I find that has a massive effect on somebody's digestive system. How mobile are they? What exercise are taking? Do they have pain? Have they got fatigue? Are they on supplements? So really, you're trying to map this person out. And I think, especially with people that have chronic illness or chronic conditions, the NHS is great when things are acute. But I think the problem with chronic illness is it's very grey, and it's hard for the NHS because they're a very medical model. So either they want to cut something out, or they want to give you medication, and if that doesn't work, what they lack is time, and what they lack is listening. And really, with chronic conditions, it really is about trying to map out what are this person's needs and what are the kind of issues that are going on with. And when I look at somebody's diet, I'm not just looking at the calories, I'm looking at the protein, I'm looking at the fibre, I'm looking at the diversity of their whole diet. Are they just eating chicken, rice and broccoli? You know, how much colour's there? What's their likes, their dislikes? How hydrated are they? What's their relationship with caffeine? Myself, I can't really drink anything that's caffeine. It just sets my heart off. You know, and so also sugar gets a bad rap. So lots of people take lots of sugar out of their diet, but in actual fact your body constantly runs on glucose. So again, that can make the situation worse. What textures do they like? Do they have any intolerances? Do they have any allergies? So I always look at the basics first, because quite often, like you said, Sandra, I have people that come to me and they've eliminated so many foods from their diet and they can't actually remember why they've taken half of them out. And it's just maybe somebody anecdotally said, oh, you know, my neighbour has got fibromyalgia, you know, and she doesn't eat courgettes. You're thinking, all right, okay, better avoid courgettes. So it kind of gets a bigger list of things that you're not taking. And then that can have a knock-on effect, because if the diversity of your diet changes, it can then change what fibres are feeding your gut microbiome. And again, that can just generally affect, you know, put you at high risk of things like bowel cancer, hormonal cancers. So it's the knock-on effect the manipulations of your diet can have on your kind of overall health. So it's complicated. That's what I'm going to keep coming back to, is that it's complicated. So when it comes to managing chronic illnesses, the recommendations are very different depending on which condition. So you get medically prescribed diets that are evidence-based by healthcare professionals. So that'd be things like low Fodmap, gluten-free, low GI, low residue. You'll also get different dietary patterns. So you'll maybe have somebody who's vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, fruitarian, which they may be doing for ethical or environmental reasons or personal choices. And then you get this level of, I don't know that fad diet's the way to put them, but there's a level of dietary manipulation that kind of goes on as well that mostly has anecdotal evidence. But again, there still needs to be research that's done on it. So what I'm going to talk about is really the kind of 3 different stages. So we have evidence-based diets for things like IBS, diabetes, celiac, and typically these will be, talked through by your doctor or a healthcare professional, and they will have, and there is clinical evidence for that condition, but that's not to say that you should take something like low Fodmap for diabetes, or you should take gluten-free for diabetes. It really, a lot of these things are disease specific. So you have to be, as I said, I had somebody that came to me, the other week there and asked to be on a low Fodmap diet for weight loss, and that really isn't what it's for. It's for trying to improve somebody's gut symptoms. So there are medically prescribed ones for specific conditions. And then there are other diets for other conditions. So things like there's things like the low histamine diet that I'll talk a little bit about. There's the Autoimmune Protocol diet, Low Salicylate diets, Ketogenic diets, Paleo. So there's loads and loads of different diets out there, but there are some that have a bit of anecdotal evidence, but there's other ones that really have no evidence at all, but are potentially maybe a fashion or what somebody's found that has worked for them. So it's my advice would be is that if you want to do something like one of these other diets, is to really to do all your research, make sure that you've got it planned before you start it, do your shopping, and potentially do it for 4 to 6 weeks and see if you've got a difference. And then and so I get people to, there's a really good app called My Symptoms Food, and you potentially would record how you're doing at the start and then all the way through, and then how you're doing at the end. And you can see in the graph, are your symptoms getting better? Because the problem is sometimes you can start something, like you said, Sandra, and that you feel great. And then 6 weeks later, you're like, do I still feel great? But what you might have forgotten is how awful you felt 6 weeks ago to kind of where you are now. So it's good to always record your symptoms at the start of it, so you can reflect, because once you begin to feel a bit better, you quite often forget how awful you had felt, kind of 6 weeks before. And then obviously there's dietary patterns. There's vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, flexitarian, and obviously there's lots of evidence to advise people to move more towards a plant-based diet, which is amazing. But what I would say is it doesn't work for everybody. So, I can get some people that come to me and they're really, really struggling. They can't tolerate salicylates, they can't tolerate histamine, they have got IBS, and they want to be vegan, and it's really, really complicated. And the other thing we've got to remember about going more towards a plant-based diet is, over the past 50 years, I think we've reduced our gut microbiome by about 25% of the different species of bacteriums and fungi and prebiotics that are in our gut. So we have become more of a refined, especially in the Western countries, we've become more of a refined eating pattern. And then now we're trying to move back towards more plant-based, and potentially we're getting a bit of feedback from our guts, because a lot of these the bacteria and that would break these things down have gone. So it's difficult when people want to follow a specific dietary pattern, but they get a lot of discomfort from it as well. And the other thing is there other patterns as well. I forgot to mention about, there's also patterns of fasting. So there's a whole, potentially over the past 5 years, there's been a big culture of intermittent fasting, you know, intermittent day fasting, 4-day fasting. So there's lots of patterns that people are wanting to try. Again, there isn't much clinical evidence, but there may be anecdotal evidence for it. So it's difficult. But again, if you are fasting, we need to make sure that the days that you are eating are as nutritionally dense as they can be. But again, that's something that we can potentially talk about further on. So I'm just going to talk about some of the diets that are out there that people are following that have kind of medical evidence behind them. So we have things like the low histamine diet. So this is, so the histamine intolerance is very poorly understood in the medical world, and most health professionals have not a lot of knowledge on it. And the diagnosis of a histamine intolerance can be a bit flaky out there. And from my point of view, it's quite a difficult condition to treat. So to explain a bit more about histamine, histamine is a chemical that's made by the body and it's found naturally in certain foods. In the body, it's produced by mast cells, which is a type of white blood cell, and it has a critical role in our immune system. So histamine is actually the key mediator in causing the symptoms of an allergy. And so that's why we take antihistamines to reduce the histamine response. And histamine also occurs in foods. It tends to be a byproduct of food that's fermented from histidine, and which is a form of protein, and it's in the family of chemicals which are called biogenic amines. And so these are produced by the bacteria during the fermentation process. So really, to make that a little bit more simple, so what it is histamine is produced in foods. It will be part of the fermentation product of that food. And the long and short of it is, the older the food is, the more histamine it has in it. It's pretty rare somebody to have a histamine intolerance. Around about 1% of the population experience a reaction to normal levels of histamine in foods. And it seems to be because of a reduction of an enzyme called diamine oxidase. And it tends to be people, we don't get a lot of histamine intolerances in children. We get it more as people age, that there can be an issue with histamine. And so it can be a result of a gastrointestinal disease. It can be due to genetics. Again, we're not 100% sure exactly why it's happening. So the symptoms of having the symptoms of having issues with histamine is that it's quite similar to an allergic reaction, but we don't have an IgE response that is the same, which is an allergic reaction reduces an IgE response. Symptoms, again, can be flushing, can be headaches, can be breathing issues, can be eczema, hives, rashes, can be gastro problems, dizziness, low blood pressure. So it's actually quite difficult to get a diagnosis of an intolerance to histamine, and the problem with following a low histamine diet is that it greatly depends on the bacteria in the food, the food composition, and how old the food is. But there's no particular test that can be done to test biogenic amines, so it's actually quite a difficult thing to get diagnosed. So what I would say is, if you think that you have a reaction to histamine, the types of foods you would be looking at are potentially things like sourdough bread, wine, beer, alcohol, fermented foods like tempeh, soya, fermented grains like sourdough bread, the things like buttermilk, sour cream, again, because these are kind of aged milks, green tea, coffee, any bean, lentil and pulse, citrus fruit, tomato products, vinegar, smoked fish. So it's quite a complex thing to take out of your diet. And so my advice would be, if you thought you had a histamine intolerance, my advice would be is to monitor your symptoms, take out all the big hitting histamine foods, see if your symptoms improve in 4 to 6 weeks, and you might find that there's a level of histamine that you can tolerate, but it's maybe just the bigger fermented foods that you need to avoid. But then again, or you might find that you have to avoid them if they're in small amounts in food. So it's quite a difficult one to follow. Other kind of diets that we know have a clinical evidence behind it is the low GI diet. Specifically, I use this for people who've got PCOS, people that are diabetic, people who've got reactive hypoglycemia. So the low GI diet has been specifically linked to reduce the insulin resistance and improve hormone levels and regulate periods in those with people who have got PCOS. A low GI diet can usually be achieved by replacing refined carbohydrates like sugar in foods and drinks, and things like white bread, white rice, with whole grains and high fibre foods. And so what GI is that they measure foods against 50 grams of pure glucose. So the highest response is 100, and what they do is they look at foods and how they are absorbed compared to glucose. So if a food that has lower than 55 would be a low GI, between 56 and 69 is medium, and high would be 70. So foods that have a low GI are preferred for people who have got diabetes, PCOS, because they are digested slower. They tend to have a higher fiber content. So when people have an insulin resistance or they have issues with sugar, the absorption is much slower. The release of sugars takes longer to go into the system, and their pancreas can cope with releasing enough insulin to support the digestion of these foods. The other thing to kind of keep in mind with being on a low GI diet is that it's not to just take GI by itself, because there are some foods that are low GI which we know are overall not great for your health. So it's like dark chocolate will potentially have a low GI, butter would have a low GI, things like sausages would have a low GI, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the kind of best foods to eat. So it's also looking at the other context of the food as well. And having foods, what also helps lower the GI of the meal is if you have things like if you have some fat and some protein with the meal as well. Again, that will just slow down the digestion and help you feel fuller for longer, and take longer for the sugar to be released into your system. We know that fruits are low GI, and potentially, although they contain things like fructose, just because of the fibre that's there, again, it just takes longer for it to be digested. The more refined a food is, so the more refined, like white bread or processed foods, the higher the GI, because it's really about they've taken all the natural things out of it, and you're kind of left with the pure carbohydrate part of it. So it's about having as near to nature foods as possible, and that's where things like, if you are following a gluten-free diet, and the problem with a lot of the gluten-free breads that you can buy in the supermarkets is that a lot of them are high GI, because a lot of them are white processed. So you're really having to try and find either a naturally lower gluten bread or one that has reports that it's got higher fibre content in it as well. Or if you're having something like your gluten-free bread, to add vegetables or beans or pulses or something to it to up the potentially improve the glycemic load of the food that you're eating. So yeah, so it can be difficult. Other things, if you feel that you've got PCOS or you're insulin resistance, double cooking certain foods will make it harder for these foods to be digested. So things like if you're having pasta, if you cook it, cool it and cook it again, it will make it more resistant to digestion, and potentially it'll be harder to get the sugar out of it. Again, the same with potatoes as well. So again, that will make the food glycemic index lower, and potentially have an easier response on you releasing insulin as well. And also the riper the food is, the higher the GI. So if you have a kind of greenish yellowy banana, you know, the glycemic index of it will be lower, but if you had quite a brown spotted banana, the glycemic index will be higher. So the kind of long and short of it is that if you have PCOS, if you have issues with your thyroid, if you have issues with diabetes, if you have reactive hypoglycemia, a low GI diet is really good for you, because it just means that your insulin response is lower, you're less insulin resistant to the foods, your body gets a chance to produce enough insulin to help with the absorption of these foods. And so if you had any of those conditions, this would be something that's been clinically proven to help. So foods would be things like, for low GI, it would be whole grain, multigrain rice, sourdough breads. Breakfast cereals would be things like pinhead oats, steel cut oats. Things like the sachets of oats are quite high glycemic index, because what they've done is they've milled it so that they're more absorbed. They can absorb the water of the milk better, but it just means that they are a bit more refined. So ideally, you're looking for the oats to be less processed. Things like apples, strawberries, apricots, peaches, pears, plums, again, great. Dried fruit has a higher glycemic index, because what they've done is they have put it in a sugar solution to get the water out of it, so it's much more sweeter and more concentrated in fruit sugars. Vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, celery, all great. The ones you need to be careful with are butternut squash, sweet potato, yams. They tend to have a little bit higher glycemic index. And if you have to follow a low GI diet, what's your friend is beans, lentils and pulses. They are full of fibre, low glycemic index, full of protein as well. So that's what I tend to get people to work on, is higher fibre, more good fats, more proteins, slow release fruit and vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils and pulses. That's what we work with. Now, where this gets difficult is if somebody comes to me with PCOS and they have got IBS and potentially have a problem with fibre as well. So again, it just depends on what condition we're having to treat with and what multiple conditions we have to treat with as well. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time about Low Fodmap Diet. I do a lot of work with people who've got IBS and low FODMAP, so I want to spend a wee bit of time talking about this. So it's estimated that potentially 15% of the population, of the world population, has IBS. We're not too sure exactly why. It can be environmental, it can be genetic, it can be through food poisoning, it can be through dietary habits as a child, it can be a dysbiosis of your gut microbiome. So there's it can be through stress, it can be through an accident. So there's many reasons why IBS can happen. It comes under the kind of functional gut disorder. It's very grey. It tends to be diagnosed through eliminating other conditions. So ideally, if you think you've got IBS, you should go to your GP, make sure they do a celiac screening to make sure that you're not celiac. They should do some gut manipulation to make sure that there's no masses. They should ideally do a stool sample as well to make sure that there is no Crohn's colitis, ulcerative colitis, diverticular disease. So yeah, some advice is, if you think you've got IBS, don't self-diagnose, because the symptoms can cross over to so many other things. You know, it has the same symptoms as Crohn's, as celiac, as ulcerative colitis, as diverticular disease, and potentially bowel cancer. Advice is always go to your doctor first to get them to eliminate other conditions before giving you an actual diagnosis of IBS. So the low FODMAP is good. What I would say first of all is it's not my first line approach. So somebody comes to me with IBS or Crohn's or colitis, it's not my first line approach. What I always do is look at them as a whole, as I've said earlier on, because IBS is so multifactorial. It's linked to the gut-brain axis. So what you think will have a direct effect on what you feel as well, and what you feel in your gut will have a direct effect on what you think. It can be triggered by lifestyle, by stress, by dietary patterns. So the other things we look at are things like how you eat. You know, do you eat very, very quickly? Do you do intermittent fasting? Because an IBS gut does better with small and regular rather than large and infrequent. We look at how you eat. Do you chew your food well? Does it have time to mix with the saliva? Do you drink and eat at the same time? Because by doing that, again, you're just washing the saliva away, which starts to break down some of the starchy carbohydrates and the proteins in your mouth. What's your gut microbiome been like? Have you been on long-term antibiotics? Do we need to address that first? Have you had food poisoning episodes? Have you been to places like Pakistan or India? Is there a chance that you could have a parasite? We look at, is there an underlying thyroid issue? Because we do know that anybody that has a thyroid issue will tend to be more prone to constipation, because obviously your thyroid's your powerhouse and it can have a direct effect on your gut. So it's not my first line. So we'd look at all your lifestyle first. We'd look at your dietary pattern. We would maybe think about, do we need to do some gut meditation? You know, do we need to calm the overthinking and your gut to just try and stop your symptoms first? Do we actually need to give you a prebiotic, probiotic, or symbiotic? Has there been do we think there's actually a dysbiosis looking at your symptoms? So yes, we kind of look at those basic things first: the pattern of what you're eating, your fibre intake, your fluid intake. And then if we think that's all okay, we then maybe look at single exclusions. So maybe taking out gluten, or taking out dairy, or maybe taking out some wind-causing fruits and vegetables first. And then if we think, no, it's nothing to do with any of that, we then maybe look at the low FODMAP diet. So the principles of it, the principles of the low FODMAP diet is that it's as an exclusion for potentially 4 to 8 weeks, and that we have to look at it. It's not a long-term diet, it's an actual experiment on yourself. So what we have to think about, why FODMAPs, why we now know, so nobody digests FODMAPs, so they are pretty undigestible, but the majority of the population don't get any symptoms from not digesting them. But with IBS, with Crohn's, with colitis, you have a sensitive digestive system. So potentially there's theory that there could be more nerves that go to your digestive system, or that your brain acutely picks up any disruption in your in the kind of gas production, or when things kind of kind of move through. And that's why with IBS, we tend to find that people do better with little and often, because if you can imagine, if you just eat a large meal all at one time, all of that's got to go through your digestive system at the one time. And again, it presses on the nerves. It potentially causes a bit more discomfort. There can be more gas production, which kind of relaxes your diaphragm, which causes that kind of pregnant belly looking as the kind of day goes on. But taking it back to FODMAPs, because I could talk about this all day, but anyway, taking it back to FODMAPs, so when you break down foods, you break proteins down to amino acids, you break down fats down to lipids, you break down carbohydrates down to sugars, and other molecules, and then they are transported from your stomach into your small intestine. The small intestine reabsorbs any glucose, amino acids, fats, vitamins and minerals. So their small intestine is an extremely long, large, narrow tube, and then what's left, what then lands in your large bowel. So IBS is a condition of your large bowel. What lands in your large bowel, really, your large bowel's job is to reabsorb water. Its job is to reabsorb salts and to form and get rid of toxins and potentially dead blood cells, make short chain fatty acids. So its job isn't to absorb food. But what we know is these FODMAPs go through the majority of your digestive system undigested, and then they hit your large bowel, and they cause a lot of kind of gas and fermentation. And with that gas and fermentation causes pain, winds, bloating. It can cause diarrhea, constipation, or it can cause a bit of them both. So, but what they found, the Monash University was the place that they did all the studies initially with. Initially, they did the studies with people who had colostomies to see if they could reduce the gas. And then they thought, I think this is something we could maybe trial with people who have got IBS. And they found that 75% of the people that tried it did get symptom relief. So the foods that contain FODMAPs are, so FODMAPs is an acronym for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So all fancy words for sugars or starches. So oligosaccharides would be things like fructans. So fructans are found in onions, garlic, wheat, and cereals. GOS is galactoligosaccharides, which are these are things like your beans, your lentils, and your pulses. And disaccharides are double sugars that are things like milk, yogurt, ice cream. Monosaccharides are single sugars like fructose, which is things like in honey, mango, and fruit juice. And polyols are natural sugar alcohols that are found in things like broccoli, cauliflower. They're also found in things like sorbitol and xylitol. So again, one of the first questions I ask if somebody does have IBS is, do you chew chewing gum? And so therefore, because again, the xylitol and sorbitol we know are natural laxatives. So the key factor to FODMAPs is that they have carbohydrates in them. So things like eggs, fish, chicken, seafood, butter, ghee, they will not have any FODMAPs in it because they don't have any carbohydrates in it. So it's only foods that are grain or fruit or carbohydrate base. So this just kind of shows you that what I was trying to explain. So the FODMAPs into the small bowel, they draw in lots of water. So potentially what lands in your large bowel is more of a higher liquid content, and they just draw water into small bowel through osmosis. So it just means that they naturally bring fluid into the small bowel. And if you remember, your large bowel is really about reabsorbing that water back out. But if what lands in that large bowel is too liquidy, it just doesn't have time to get enough of that liquid out. And these FODMAPs, so really the food shouldn't arrive at your large bowel. It should all have been digested, but these FODMAPs do. And what they do is they just ferment with that bacteria. And if you can imagine, this just distends your large bowel, which causes the pain, the bloating, the wind, the gas. But it can also cause pockets of constipation. So if you've got a big pocket of gas, you know, you might find it hard to go until that gas has kind of moved through. So what we do know is the Fodmap diet definitely has an improve on pain, wind, bloating, but it tends not to improve constipation. So what I do find with people who have constipation, they try the low Fodmap diet, is that it tends to improve some of the gut symptoms like the bloating and the wind, but it'll not make them go more regularly. There can be a slight improvement with heartburn and burping and reflux, but again, it just depends on the individual. These ones tend not to be improved so much with the low Fodmap diet. And I don't know if you can see that there, but all the stuff that I'm talking about today is I've sent over to Ellie the slides, so you can kind of look through these at your leisure. But if you were on the low Fodmap diet, we'd be taking out things like onions, garlic, peas, corn, and things like fennel. But you'd make sure that you have things like carrots, courgettes, aubergines, tomatoes, radishes, green beans. So it's about choosing lower Fodmap fruits and vegetables. So it's not a no Fodmap diet, it's just a lower content of it. We can't have a diet that has no Fodmaps in it, but we try to just reduce the amount. And again, if you were having fruits, we'd be having things like clementines, we'd be having things like melon, we'd be having things like strawberries and raspberries instead of apples and pears, peaches and plums. From milk point of view, we'd be making sure that you had maybe rice milk, lacto-free milk, instead of normal milk or soya milk. And things like bread, we've moved more towards a gluten-free style bread, things like oat cakes, cornflakes, Rice Krispies, rather than things like bran flakes, Special K, normal bread, crumpets and crackers. So it's about trying to, when people come to me, they want to try low Fodmap diet, we try to keep their diet the same, but just swap things out rather than making it more difficult for people to follow. And so with a low Fodmap diet, there's 3 stages. There's an elimination stage. So it's like doing an experiment on yourself. So what we do is we take it out for 4 to 8 weeks. We monitor your symptoms, and then what we do is we challenge you with them, and then we look at reintroduction. The problem I have is lots of people come to me and they've been on the elimination stage for years. And so my worry about being on the elimination stage for years is that, if you can remember, the fibre feeds your gut microbiome for your long-term health. It's important to have a diverse mix of prebiotic bugs in your system, and being on the long-term low Fodmap diet can change the landscape of your gut microbiome. Again, so it can reduce the diversity. It can overall have a lower fibre intake, which can have an effect on your cholesterol levels and promote things like heart disease and bowel cancer. So it's important to do it like you're doing an experiment. And so if you're on the elimination stage, we would look at the labels, we'd look at food planning, we'd look at the diversity, we'd also look at your stress levels. We'd only do it at a time where life was calm, because if we do it when there's chaos, the chaos could be causing the symptoms rather than the food. We'd make sure that you have all the tools. So there's really good places to get information from. So the Monash University, people like bloggers like A Little Bit Yummy, Joe Leach, there's loads of information out there that's reliable kind of for you to use, and there's loads of Facebook groups out there as well. So again, we review your symptoms at the start, we'd review them at 4 weeks and 8 weeks, and then what we'd look at is, right, okay, have your symptoms got better? Are we at a stage where we can look at challenging? Some people, we need to go a little bit further with it, but most people, it's enough to give them some symptom relief. So the reintroduction process is that we would, you have to stay in the low Fodmap diet throughout the reintroduction process. So this whole thing can take anywhere between 3 months and 6 months. And what we would do is we would take one FODMAP. So say we took honey, and what we'd do is we systematically challenge you with it. So we would take it small amount on day 1, monitor your symptoms. If you're okay, go on to day 2, double the dose. If you're okay, go on to day 3. If at any point you get symptoms, we just stop and we give it 3 days to get out of your system before we start another challenge. What we have to bear in mind is, how are you feeling at that time? Are you stressed? Is there anything else going on that could have caused the symptoms, or is it definitely the food that it has been? The thing that we don't do is, once you've challenged the food, we don't reintroduce it back into your diet until we've done the whole process, because it can just muddy things up. So we're trying to keep you on the low FODMAP diet. We challenge you to see how you're with it, and then we don't bring it back into your diet till you've challenged yourself with all the foods. So we do single FODMAPs. We do the honey, the wheat, the garlic, the onion, the dairy, the sweet potato or broccoli, and then we go into double FODMAPs. So some foods have 2 types of FODMAPs in them. So things like apples, pears, peaches, nectarines, they have 2 types of FODMAPs in them. And again, it would be the same process that we would do, as in we challenge you on day 1 with some, monitor your symptoms, and then double or triple the dose depending on what you can tolerate. And then once we've challenged the single ones, we've challenged the double ones, we then look at, right, okay, if you can tolerate a glass of milk, plum, and you know, a spoonful of beans, how does that look? How can we have that every day? Can we bring back in some milk that day plus beans that day, and how are you? So it still is a kind of working process. So it needs, so you can understand why the recommendation is that you work with a dietitian when you're doing the low FODMAP diet, because it has so many stages to it, and it can be complicated, and there can be things that can you know, kind of muddy the water. So it definitely is effective for IBS, but it's not something that I do lightly. So when people come to see me and look at IBS, it's something that I will do, but it's very rarely do I do it as first hand. It's something that I look at everything else that's going on to see if low FODMAP is something that we should try. The other thing is, there's a study that's just happened with the Monash University, where they looked at people who were following the low FODMAP diet, and they then looked at the people that were doing gut meditation, and the people that did gut meditation had a better outcome than the people that did the low FODMAP diet. So that's where we have to look at, is it that there's over signals going to your gut? If people can get into a cycle of worry, as in, my gut doesn't behave, I begin to worry, the worry gives me gut symptoms, and they can end up in that cycle. So it is effective, but there is complications that come with it, and it can be quite restrictive. But as I said, it is effective, but it's not my first line of what I would do with somebody who had IBS or IBD or Crohn's or colitis. So the low salicylate diet, so salicylates are acids that are found naturally in plants. They are there as a defense system, so they're there in the leaves of plants to protect themselves against from bacteria and insects and diseases. So the low salicylate diet, there's more, quite often we find people can't tolerate things like aspirin, and because aspirin is quite high in salicylates, so salicylates in quite a lot, or in salicylate intolerance, is quite common in types of medications. Again, it's more common in adults than it is in children. Signs that you may have a salicylate problem is you have sinus infections, you get polyps in your nasal cavity, you have issues with asthma, hives, fevers, swelling, abdominal pain, diarrhea. So it's similar overlapping symptoms to what would be an allergy, and quite often it's misdiagnosed because people think it's an allergic reaction you're having, but it's actually the salicylates that are the problem. So not everybody who has a salicylate problem with medication needs to needs to avoid foods. But what we think is a salicylate sensitivity is caused by an overproduction of leukotrienes, which are inflammatory mediators, and there's a link with conditions like asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease. So people with these conditions are maybe a higher chance of having a salicylate problem. Again, it's kind of dose dependent. Some people can tolerate a little bit, other people can't tolerate any of it at all. And so, and again, there's not a lot of, it's a lot of it's anecdotal, and there's not a massive amount of evidence out there. But again, it's looking at your symptoms. Have you got rheumatoid arthritis? Are you prone to nasal problems, or are you prone to hives and swelling? Is this something that you should maybe look at? The only thing I would report is that salicylates are high in most fruits and vegetables, and things like spices, so things like cumin, coriander, ginger. So if you're going to be on a low salicylate diet, potentially we're going to take out a lot of fibre and colour from your diet. It's also found in things like tea, rum. So quite a lot of people say, oh, I can't tolerate red wine. Again, we might have to look at salicylates if that's the problem, for getting a kind of allergic reaction to it. It's also found in things like perfumes, shampoos, mouthwashes, medications. So it's quite a difficult one to avoid. But as I said, if you've got any of these conditions and you're having any of these symptoms, it's maybe something to has some evidence in that. It might be worth trying to take it out, see how you are, and then looking at challenging you with a little bit of it to see, does it come back, or can you tolerate a little bit irregularly without mediating a kind of allergic reactions type thing. So kind of moving on to things like the ketogenic diet, the paleo diet. So what we know is the low Fodmap diet has evidence. We know that the low GI diet has evidence. We know that the low salicylate, low histamine, there's all evidence for those. So ketogenic diet is quite a new thing. It was initially founded to help with children who had epilepsy. But we find that quite a lot of people are trying to be ketogenic, and really the principles of being on a ketogenic diet is that it has less than 50 grams of carbohydrate a day, which is less than is found in a bagel. So it's quite a low carbohydrate diet. What I find is when people try the ketogenic diet, is they get something called keto flu. So quite often, potentially 5 to 7 days into it, they feel absolutely awful. But quite often that begins to go, and they begin to feel better. The other side effects are constipation, because it takes out carbohydrates, which gives us a lot of fibre. So although you're eating vegetables, it's actually very difficult to get that 30 grams of fibre that's recommended for a healthy digestive system being on a ketogenic diet, because it's mostly protein and fats with some vegetables. The ketogenic diet tends to be lower in fruits, higher in vegetables, and higher in protein. Again, so there's some studies that have used the ketogenic diet for weight loss, but what I would say is a lot of these studies are only based on 12 weeks. Some of the studies we looked at didn't have control groups, and when we looked at the ketogenic diet compared to normal weight loss principles, at 12 months they tended to have the same effect. So what I would say is there's less research, there's more anecdotal claims for the ketogenic diet. It definitely does have benefits for children who have epilepsy, but if it's something that you're wanting to try, again, my advice is do your research, plan it, try it for 4 to 6 weeks, see if it's something that you feel better doing. and then think about how am I going to do this long term for long term health. So how am I going to make sure that I'm getting in enough calcium? How am I going to make sure I'm getting enough fiber? How am I going to make sure I'm going to get in enough antioxidants if this is something that you want to take kind of long term? So the paleo diet, this has become more popular over the past few years, and it's kind of resembles what we call the hunter-gatherer aspects of eating, and so it's mostly based on fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, lean meats, grass-fed animals, wild game, fish, especially those high in omega-3s, so things like salmon, mackerel, tuna, olive oil, walnut oil. So the principles of it is actually, it's actually quite good, but but the things you've got to look out for is that it can be more prone to being lower in calcium. So potentially if you've got issues with osteoporosis or scoliosis, that potentially you need to make sure that you're making sure that there's you are getting sources of calcium as well in your diet. Again, there's some research to say that as effectively weight loss, it can improve people's glucose tolerance, better blood pressure, lower triglycerides, better appetite management. But again, the research there isn't effective enough for us to say that clinically people should use it. But some of the principles are really good, but it's very it's quite restrictive. A lot of the time when people come to me for weight loss, I try to mimic how they like to eat, and also we work on the principles of 80-20. So 80% focus, 20% party, because life is for living and it's not just about being over restrictive. So when diets are very over restrictive, you can then start to get poor habits of and a poor relationship with food, but we'll kind of talk about that kind of further along. The other diet that kind of had a bit of popularity is the alkaline diet, or the kind of blood diet, and the principles behind this is that the alkaline diet is based on the idea that when you break down foods, you have acid forming foods and you have alkaline forming foods. So they claim that when you break down acidic foods, you're left with something that's called the metabolic ash. And this metabolic ash can affect the acidity or alkalinity of your body. So what I would say is there's not really much evidence that this is how it works. It's not as simple as that. The pH of your body is different in different parts of your stomach is extremely low pH to kill off any viruses, bacteria, break down food. Your blood pH remains constantly at 7, but your urine pH can really it can fluctuate, because it will depend on what you're eating, will depend on how alkaline or how acidic your urine is. And so therefore, but your body's equipped to cope with all these things. So there will be tiny fluctuations in your body with the pH. And obviously if you eat something like a big steak, your urine is going to be more acidic, because your body's trying to constantly keep your blood at constant 7. So what will change will be how much acid is excreted out in your urine. So the base of the alkaline diet is mostly kind of vegetarian, and they get you to avoid things like meat, fish, chicken, dairy, eggs, grains, alcohol, and promote more neutral starches, fruits, vegetables, legumes. But the bottom line is that there isn't any clinical evidence to say that it is effective. And there's claims that it can fight cancer. There's claims that these aren't backed by science. And what I do find is that quite often when people have chronic conditions, or they have things like cancer, that you're desperate to find any way to either reduce the effect. But what can happen is you can you know, you can end up losing vast amounts of weight unnecessarily. You can end up being protein malnourished, so you're just not getting enough protein in your diet. These things are very high in fibre. They can affect you. You can get full really, really quickly. So my advice is, if this is something you want to try, you know, I would do all your research, make sure that you've planned it, to try it, to see if you begin to feel better. But clinically, there's no evidence to say that this is effective for kind of any kind of medical conditions. Other diets that are out there, the Autoimmune Protocol, which is kind of it's autoimmune diseases, things like lupus, inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis. These are all based on the purpose of your body has extra inflammation, and the Autoimmune Protocol is proposed to reduce this inflammation, the pain, and other symptoms. And again, so it's based on principles similar to the Paleo Diet, yes, so it's the principles, you take out things like coffees, nightshades, eggs, alcohol, beans, lentils, pulses, and grains, and the kind of reintroduction phase. So what I would say is, it's if you do have an autoimmune condition and it's something that you want to try, again, make sure that it is you know, something that you've done all the investigation, you know, to see if it makes a difference. So again, there's not a lot of evidence for the immune protocol, but I do get quite a few people come to me who are wanting to try it. And then again, we've got the different dietary patterns. So we've got you know, vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian. What I would say is that when you're vegetarian, vegan, there's now a whole process of foods out there that are plant-based burgers, or plant-based chicken strips and things like that. What you just have to be careful is that these things are as natural as possible. They're not full of chemicals. So it's, if you're being vegetarian, if you're being vegan, it's trying to be as near to plant, as natural as possible. So there's obviously, we know there's much more evidence. The more plant-based that you are, the lower rates of being overweight, obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, again, because these are full of anti-inflammatory, antioxidants, and they're full of fibre. But again, it's about making sure that you're as healthy as possible, because, you know, with me staying in Glasgow, I have some vegans who come to me and really they're just on chips and beans. So it's, you know, it's still, we have to make sure that there's as diverse a diet as possible with the dietary pattern that you're wanting to follow. So let me just bring everybody back up. So I'm going to pause here because I'm getting jolly. All I've done is talk for the past hour. So has anybody got any thoughts on, has anybody tried any of those diets before? Anybody tried the alkaline diet? Has anybody been in a low GI? You know, what about yourself, Ellie? What about yourself, Sandra?
No, apart from the gluten-free, I haven't tried anything else. That's why I wanted to be on the workshop, actually, to learn a bit more about it, because I did hear about like the keto diet, and it would be good for pain management. Am I right in thinking that? Obviously not with what you said now.
See, that's the thing is that and so it depends on, like, if you're in Facebook groups, there'll be people that come on and say, listen, I've done ketogenic and I feel a million times better. And you'll have other people that come on and say, oh, I've been following the alkaline diet and I feel great. Again, a bit like what you said, Sandra, is that people 6 weeks in are still feeling as good as when you first started. quite often you can get a bit of a high that you're doing something new, that you're feeling better with it. If what my advice would be is if you want to try the ketogenic diet, is it because you're trying to lose weight because you feel that the weight is a pain on your joints, or is it because the fibromyalgia that you feel is a bit more kind of inflammation? What I would say from an inflammation point of view, the ketogenic diet is quite high in meat, which potentially can be inflammatory.
In itself, yeah.
So that's where initially the ketogenic diet was just for epilepsy, but other people have taken on for other conditions, but it hasn't really been tested for fibromyalgia as such.
Okay. And can I ask you, what is gut meditation? Sorry, you've mentioned it quite a few. Sorry. I don't want to be taking all the time.
No, you're fine. So gut meditation is, so we know that with upset digestive systems, there's the vagus nerve between, so your brain and your gut are in constant they're constantly talking to each other. So what you feel in your gut will have a direct effect on your mood. How your mood is will have a direct effect on your gut. So there can be overstimulation. So there can be messages that are sent from your gut to your brain so there can be an overproduction of messages that can cause spasms. So it can cause constipation, diarrhea. So gut meditation is trying to calm those messages, because with things like anxiety and things like stress, what can happen is messages are sent to your gut, and it can have a negative effect. And again, if you work a lot on adrenaline, what can happen is that the adrenaline will have an effect in that it will stop the blood flow as much to your gut, because the blood needs to be priority to your arms and your legs, because it thinks you're going to have to run. So what happens is the transit of your gut, you can end up more constipated. So what we're trying to do is reduce the anxiety, reduce the overproduction of messages from your brain to your gut. And there's a really good app called Nerva, Nevra, and it's been produced by the Monash University. And it's a 6-week course, and it's just meditation, but it's visualization from your brain and your gut.
Okay, thank you.
So we do know things like yoga, meditation, but this one's very, very specific for your digestive system. So if you think that potentially, if you know that when you're stressed, your symptoms get much worse, then if that's a stress and worry is something that you're having to deal with, then maybe potentially trying to calm those messages is something to look at.
Thank you.
Oh, no worries. So what about you, Ellie? You were saying earlier on that you're on a low histamine diet. Can you tolerate foods that have got small amounts of histamine in them, or is it really like none at all?
Yeah, well, so I take 2 antihistamines twice a day, and I'm also on a mast cell stabilizer, so that 10 times fast. So that helps me to not have such a restrictive diet as when I was on the full low histamine diet. Yes. So I can have bits and bobs, but I do avoid fermented foods. I tend to avoid leftovers. My husband eats all the leftovers and that sort of thing, but like I can eat, tomatoes and that sort of thing, like those things are not too bad. And things in small quantities, like I never eat soy sauce in such huge quantities that it causes a problem, but like I would never eat kimchi or kombucha or anything like that, because I know I would like become beetroot in the face and I'd start sweating and my heart rate would go up, and I know that my histamine intolerance would kick in despite the tablets and everything, and it's become second nature now. Like I don't think about it particularly.
So for you,
kinda
you potentially have to make everything fresh. Everything has to be made fresh. You do, and again, so you do better with a tomato than tinned tomatoes or passata, you know, things that have kind of sat for longer. Or if you made a bolognese, you could eat it with fresh tomatoes, but you couldn't have it the next day.
Yeah, I'm not too bad with tinned tomatoes, but I wouldn't then eat it the next day. I'd probably be all right, but it's just I've learned it's better not to risk it. So it's become like habitual now not to, for my histamine intolerance. I mean, I say that obviously at the moment I'm tube fed, so at the moment everything is coming out of a bottle anyway. And I have no idea about what is in that, and I'm not tolerating that especially well, and I wonder whether that's the makeup of that maybe isn't quite suiting like the various other things quite right, if that makes sense.
If it's knocking off some other, I know, because the problem with the artificial feeding is that it is it's just lots of chemicals put together, lots of fats and sugars and whatever kind of put together, but is it slightly higher because it's sat for longer. But there is some there's some move towards actual blended food tube feeding.
Okay.
They're kind of trying to again move it more towards blended food than in bolus feeding rather than
I assume that only works if you've got so mine's an NJ tube, it goes into my small intestine, so I assume I couldn't stick any old thing into there. But I know you can get some feeds that are kind of easier to digest than others, so I am just waiting on a dietitian appointment to ask for kind of one that's you can get kind of pre-digested ones and things like that. An
elemental feed would be better, or a peptide feed. I don't know if you're on a peptide feed just now, but it just means that everything, because your stomach does quite a bit of work because it's bypassed there. If the proteins are wholer, it's harder for it to digest, whereas if they're broken down to some of the amino acids, it really is passively absorbed. So yes, you may do better on an elemental or a peptide feed instead.
It's still a lot better than I spent the first third of the year just vomiting absolutely everything, so at least I'm not there.
You're in a better place. So what I've got now is I've got a bit of a case study that I just kind of wanted to talk through to maybe kind of put it into more of a visual patient idea, rather than, because I'm talking through things and it's hard to maybe visualize it as is that similar to me. So let me talk through that. I am conscious of time because the problem is that I can just talk, so it may get to a point we might skip a few slides maybe on the general eating, but we can kind of see how time goes. So let me just reduce these again. Okay, so let me tell you about Mrs. X. So she came to me, her main conditions were Raynaud's syndrome, potentially in her hands and in her joints and in her knees. They also found she had an autoimmune condition which affected her connective tissue, but they didn't actually have a name for it, which quite often is the case with autoimmune conditions. She had constant headaches, 2017 for about 18 months with no real improvement. So off her own back, she'd taken out meat, dairy, gluten, felt much better. But she then thought that she would challenge herself. So she challenged herself with gluten. She found she got mouth ulcers and brain fog, but she was negative for celiac, but she was also genetically Irish. So although she was negative for celiac, she could actually still have celiac disease, but it would be more picked up in a biopsy, but that wasn't ever offered to her. She found that when she took dairy, she ended up with a nasal drip down the back of her throat. She found that eggs when she challenged them, made her tongue swell, made her throat claggy when she ate meat. And so she was on more of a vegan diet she found that just kind of generally helped her. But what she found was that she would do fine for 6 weeks, and then she'd have a 2-week crash of chronic fatigue, autoimmune, everything kicked off, and then she'd build herself back up and she'd be fine, and then she'd have another crash. So what she came to me was she wanted to find out, was there a dietary link with what she was doing? She generally thought she ate well. She, in looking at her food diary, looking at it without analysing, in general, it looked well. It looked whole grain. It looked like it had fruits and vegetables in it. It did look at a glance at it that it was low in protein, but we'll kind of come to that as well. The other thing is that she was perimenopausal. She was, when she felt well, she pushed herself to the max. She had 4 children. She exercised once, twice a day. She managed her stress through yoga, but she couldn't maintain her weight, and she kept having these recurrent crashes of symptoms. So what we did was we looked at, I got her to keep a 14-day food diary. What I did was I took 7 days of those and I put them through an analysis program, and that gave us a full readout of everything, all her vitamins, all her minerals, all her fats, our fibre, our protein, our calories, and it gave us a very, very detailed intake, and it also calculated for her supplements. So she did take quite a few supplements. She supplemented her diet with some calcium, zinc, magnesium, but what we did find is that that a lot of those supplements were massively supplementing her diet. When we looked at her diet, it didn't have anywhere enough iron, it didn't have enough iodine, it was very low in selenium, there was no vitamin D, very little vitamin E, vitamin B12 was very low, which is very common with clients that are vegan, and there was no omega-3s. So although she was supplementing, her diet was particularly low in all these key nutrients. So you could see why she was doing okay, and then she was having a crash. Overall as well, her calorie intake wasn't enough. She was too busy. She ate on the run. Everybody else was a priority. Her eating was something she did pay attention to, but kind of not enough. Her protein intake was low. It was around about 40 grams, and ideally you're looking for about 1 gram of protein per kilogram body weight on ideal body weight. Generally her fat intake was pretty low because she wasn't having enough things like nuts and seeds. And again, she was grilling everything. She wasn't frying anything in olive oil. What we found is there was quite a few things that were limiting. So what we did with her is we got her to add almonds to increase her calcium intake. We got her to add tofu into her smoothies in the morning to up her calcium. We added things like beans, lentils and pulses into things like wraps, into her stews to up her iron intake. We changed her cereal in the morning to Oatabix because again it had more iron in it too. As simple as adding 2 Brazil nuts, it gave her intake for selenium for the day. And we added some chai seeds into her smoothie in the morning as well, and again that helped push her selenium intake up. We made sure she removed the type of milk that she was using to a fortified soya milk or an oat milk to up the iodine content, and we got to use a little bit of iodized salt instead of normal salt to bring her iodine up too. Potentially everybody in the UK should take a vitamin D supplement, and the recommendations by the government are 10 micrograms. As rule of thumb, I get people to take 25 micrograms because we don't know how much sun, how much we produce, and potentially the recommendations are the same for a baby as they are for an adult, which is 10 micrograms from the government. So 25 micrograms is potentially what Europe and America advise people to have. And again, definitely supplementing over the winter. Over the summer, again, it depends on how much you're outside, how much you expose your skin to daylight will depend on how much your vitamin D stores are. And vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, so your body, when it gets it, it stores it. But what you have to remember is every single cell in your body requires vitamin D. So my recommendation is everybody should have a vitamin D supplement. Her vitamin E intake was low, so again, by adding the almonds, flaked almonds into things like curries, sunflower seeds onto her porridge, that helped up her vitamin E intake. And vitamin B12 was low because, you know, the highest source of vitamin B12 we get from animal sources, and it's actually due to the bacteria on the animal, on the meat that causes us to have to get vitamin B12. But using things like nutritional yeast in her savoury dishes, using things like Marmite on toast, using a vegan spread, fortified breakfast cereals, adding nutritional yeast into her potatoes, again helped up her vitamin B12. And then what we did for the omega-3 is we added in walnuts into any baking she was doing. We used cooked with rapeseed oil. We added chopped walnuts into things like soups and to use them as like a kind of crouton type thing. And we sprinkled seeds onto our porridge and our yogurts or salads. So although our diet was pretty good, that we could, with her having to be vegan, we had to make sure she was a savvy vegan, and you have to be really, really tight with you know, your calcium, your iron, your selenium, your iodine, because these are all vitamins that potentially can be affected. And really, this is just kind of like what she said at the back of it, is that that she's eating much smarter, she feels much more nourished, and really what we helped was not that she doesn't have any cycles of fatigue anymore, but they're much more infrequent. And now that she's got the attention onto food, she is you know, generally doing much better with the diet that she's having to follow because of all her other kind of chronic conditions. So what I just wanted to talk about is, take a wee drink of water, is that the kind of rule of thumb to know if a diet is for you or whether it's not for you. So the general rule of thumb is, if you're unsure whether a diet is for you, is to talk to somebody about it. So quite often people come to me and just say, I want to just chat through, I'm thinking about doing this, what are your thoughts, how can I do it, how can I do it well with my other conditions. Several diets have limited scientific research that support their claims, so be careful, do your research. Don't just take it from your neighbour next door that you need to avoid courgettes. You know, look at the pros and the cons of doing this. What's the process? What's the cost? What's the, you know, what am I actually going to eat? Can I do it for the next 4 to 6 weeks? Do I monitor my symptoms on it, and monitor my symptoms at the end of it? If what I'm doing needs supplementation, so potentially, you know, things like the ketogenic diet, do I need a calcium supplement with it as well? Do I need to take a fibre supplement too to prevent against constipation? You know, what you know, will it need more than just doing the diet itself? And again, if you do it in 4 to 6 weeks time, you feel no improvement, then stop it, because you should feel an improvement with it. And again, looking at, is it sustainable? Is this something that I can kind of do long term? So again, a fad diet is a kind of plan where you eat a very restricted diet with few foods or an unusual combination, but, you know, and it offers quick fixes. So things like the Alkaline Diet, the celery juice diet, which seems to be very bone broth as well, as one that people come to me as well with blood types. So again, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but if it's something that you feel that you're quite convinced is going to help you, is to plan it, organise it, and measure it before and measure it after to see, has it made a difference? And if it has, it's then thinking long term, how can I do this long term and sustainably for long term health as well? What I forgot to say about that case study is all those modifications that we did to her diet, she made those changes gradually over 6 weeks. So because if we just made all those changes that I recommended straight away, it's quite overwhelming, and also we need to get our gut to get used to the changes in fibre as well. So again, quite often it's really important about, especially if we're having to do any manipulation with fibre, we do it gradually, and we support it with fluid, and we support it with movement to make sure that it doesn't have an adverse effect on your digestive system as well. So the reasons I'd get people to avoid a fad diet is, again, there's not a lot of evidence. If you look and so again, if you look at the study and it's done on 10 people and a dog, then potentially it's not clinically proven. And quite often the best thing is to look at, and they may make claims of, oh, you'll lose X, Y, and Z weight. But again, a lot of these things can be misleading. So you've got to read past the headline. You've got to look at, because quite often, every week, every day, there's some sort of study that's came out to say, oh, don't eat this, it'll improve your arthritis. But so again, you've got to kind of look below, what was the group type? How many people were in the group? Was it measured against people who didn't do it? So again, it's good to do your research. The thing about faddy diets is one diet fits all. So, but as I said at the start of it, is you're all fingerprints. So everybody's so individual that it's not one diet fits all. With being on a fad diet, it can be very restrictive. You can take out massive food groups. So again, you can be having not enough fibre, not enough iron, not enough calcium. So again, I'm not a fan when they take out full food groups kind of out of your diet. And also things are a fashion. For a long time, it was fat was bad, we shouldn't eat fat. And then now it's moved on to sugar. And so it's there can be fashions with kind of diets as well. Also, it can promote negative relationships with food. So it then becomes that food becomes the enemy. You feel deprived. The joy and satisfaction kind of comes out of food. There can be food shame. There can be guilt. So it can promote a kind of negative effect. Can then become quite obsessive. So dieting can lead to unhealthy behaviours like skipping meals, fasting, binging, excessive exercise, calorie counting. So it's you have to be careful what other behaviours kind of come with it. And again, I'm going to end up with nutrition deficiencies if you're on a celery juice diet, which is low in everything, low in calories, protein, fats, calcium, iodine, iron. So again, and again, over restricting calories if you're physically active, again, like that case study we had, of course she was fatigued, there just wasn't enough energy coming in. So again, it can promote more of your chronic fatigue, the tiredness, the muscle wasting, the weakened immune system, higher increase of injury if you are sporty. Again, if you're looking to start a family, to over restricting your diet can have issues with your fertility, weaken your bones, lower your metabolic rate. And again, because people with chronic conditions can have issues with weight loss, but just losing weight and not knowing what weight you're losing isn't helpful, because you could just be losing muscle tissue, which potentially is, making your chronic fatigue worse. So it's looking at, what body tissue are you actually losing. And again, being on a fatty diet can affect your mental health. You can start to end up in a weight cycle, so causing things like lower self-esteem, high risk of depression, over-restricting, which maybe then causes binging later on at night. And remember what I said earlier on, your brain and your spinal cord need a constant supply of glucose. So again, over-restricting restricts the energy that your brain gets, so potentially again can make your fatigue worse. And again, just impacting on social life. So you're on this very restrictive diet where you can't eat X, Y, and Z. And so it means you can't go to people's houses for something to eat, although we'll not be doing that in lockdown, or potentially go out for something to eat, because food does bring, for the majority of us, food does bring socializing and pleasure. So it's a lot of this can be over restrictive and unnecessary. So the keys to finding if something is a fad diet, how to spot it, is the promising a magic bullet. There's ingredients in it that are going to solve your weight problem. So what was it, cranberry, there was some sort of cranberry ketones or something like that people were taking, and it was going to melt all your fat. Absolutely doesn't. It was if they promise rapid weight loss, if there's a magical fat burning effect to the food. It's like people say to me, oh, in the morning I have lemon and water because that melts the fat. It doesn't. It just gives you a bit more vitamin C. So things like, we've all done a cabbage soup diet, all it does is give you bad wind. You do lose a big amount of weight, but then in the next 2 weeks you put it all back on because it's only fluid that you've lost as well. So if it tells you to have random combinations, like I can only eat bacon with, blueberries, it's at the end of the day, your body, these things aren't put together in your small intestine, so that kind of isn't how it works. If it's endorsed by a celebrity, I'm always dubious, because usually they're getting paid for it. Again, things like liquid meals, surviving without food. If it's focusing on your appearance rather than your health benefits, if they sell you, 20 different supplements as well. That's the other thing is that I was watching this personal trainer the other day there and watching his Instagram, and he literally took a handful of about 20 vitamins and minerals and had them before his breakfast. And what we don't know, what hasn't been tested, is the combination of different vitamins and minerals put together in mega doses, and that there has been some poor outcomes with people that have taken mega doses of supplements. So again, these things haven't been regulated. We don't know what the combination of taking mega dose of vitamin C with mega dose of vitamin E, if that has an adverse effect. So just to be careful with the supplements you're taking and make sure that you know why you are taking them. And again, recommending that the same diet has the same effect on everybody. And remember, as I was saying, that everybody's a fingerprint. So, everybody is completely different. So I always think about inclusion beats exclusion. So it's about what can you include in your diet that you can tolerate to kind of make you feel as well as you can. So really, what I was talking to Ellie about earlier on was, to eat as well as you can when you can with the chronic condition, and when you're not great, to do the best you can at that specific time, because it's extremely difficult to manage your nutrition plus your chronic condition. And I looked at some of the studies that Chronic Weight Awesome have done, and it was noted that almost half of the people in the study struggle to know what priorities in the diet, and 45% lack the confidence to meet their daily dietary requirements. So it's really difficult with having a chronic condition and having the energy and the knowledge to meet your needs. Oops. So the kind of next part really was to kind of go through the kind of Eatwell model, but I'm not too sure whether that's something that we should do. The Eatwell model's slightly out of date. This is really what they generally advise for healthy eating, but to use some of these principles kind of generally for your own needs. My key advice is about balance and diversity. So my key is to try and have as much diversity in your diet. So potentially as many different colours of fruits and vegetables that you can tolerate, as many different types of different fibres. So things like you get different things, to having quinoa, to having pasta, to having buckwheat, to having pearl barley, to having rice. So to have as much a diverse intake as you can tolerate. And potentially it's difficult when you've got chronic conditions, but not to see food as the enemy, and to try to eat as regularly kind of as you can, because we do know that when people over restrict, what will happen is they'll tend to be a binge, they'll tend to be over intake, and one that brings a whole load of stress with it of actually doing that. But then also potentially nobody ever binges on carrots. When people binge, they tend to binge on things that are either pro-inflammatory, high in fat, so and then what can happen is you can be upset and ashamed after, and then you over restrict the next day, which then over time potentially will be another binge. So it's trying to, regularity is really important. And again, I noted from the survey that Chronically Awesome did, is that 6% of people struggle to maintain a healthy diet, and it is difficult when you've got a chronic condition. But the main thing is to try to eat the best you can when you can. So ideally, with all the limitations that you have, and potentially if you have to follow a low histamine diet, or if you have to follow a low Fodmap diet or a paleo diet, it's trying to have as much colour in it as possible, because what we do know is colour in fruits and vegetables do give you anti-inflammatory properties and antioxidants, and antioxidants are very protective. They coat all your cells, and it just means that all the damage you get from pollution, from the environment, from chemicals, they help protect your body cells. So it's really important to have as much colour, so purples, reds, oranges, greens, yellows, because you get so much different antioxidants, polyphenols, flavonoids, and all these they're important in managing chronic conditions, because it gives you so many different extra nutritional factors. So we kind of talked about, so we want to make sure you have as much colour in your diet. Ideally, I very rarely tell anybody to be on I might do a bit low carb diet with people, but I never exclude carbs from people's diets, because it's such a great fibre source, and it gives us so many B vitamins. And so I'm not a big one for eliminating major food groups. So advice is with the starchy carbohydrates is to keep them as dark as possible if you can tolerate them. Again, it depends if you get IBD, Crohn's, colitis, diverticular disease, but it's to try to have a slow release carbohydrates as much as possible. Dairy is really important, or fortified milk substitutes are really important, because they're our biggest source of calcium. So ideally you're looking for oat milk, almond milk, rice milk. It's really important to have it in your diet if you aren't taking dairy itself, because it will give you a source of calcium. It will give you some magnesium and phosphate. They tend to be fortified with it, and lots of them are fortified with vitamin D as well. And we need it for our bones, we need it for our heart to function with the calcium protein pumps that make our heart work as well. And if you had a weakness with your bones, you wouldn't feel it, because you don't really feel it until it's too late. And as potentially women especially are more prone to osteoporosis post-menopausal, and then what happens is calcium just leaks out of your bones, so you can't put as much calcium in as you take back out. And again, if there's not enough calcium in your diet, your bones are like coral. They will release calcium into your system, but again, you potentially not feel any of this effect kind of later on in life. So it's really important, if you're not taking milk, cheese, yogurts, that you do have a dairy alternative in your diet as well. Protein is really important, especially for energy, muscle repair, growth, satiety. And it's my advice is to try and have a mixture of plant proteins and if you're on a normal diet, plant proteins plus meat proteins. Ideally, if you have issues with inflammation, you probably want to reduce your red meat intake, because there can be a pro-inflammatory response with too much red meat. The government guidelines are less than 500 grams of red meat a week. But potentially red meat contains palmitic acid and arachidonic acid, which are high in omega-6s, which can have a pro-inflammatory effect. So it's important, potentially, if you do have inflammation and you are just on a meat-based diet, that you do look at trying to include some plant-based proteins as well. And again, it may have a beneficial effect on your inflammation levels. So it's really important, protein for preventing muscle breakdown, especially to preserving conditions like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobility, cystic fibrosis. So it's really important you do have a decent amount of protein in your diet as well. As I said earlier on, fat's got a bit of a bad rap for a while, but it's really important to have fats, especially monosaturated fats. They're cardiovascular protective. Olive oil, rapeseed oil, nuts, seeds, oily fish are really beneficial, and oily fish omega-3s are really important because they stop clots from forming, they stop the stickiness of red blood cells. So again, if you can't find it, and if you don't like oily fish, or you're vegan or vegetarian, it's really important that you have rapeseed oil and nuts and seeds, because again, they're higher in omega-3s. And yes, obviously things that are high in fat and sugar and salt have a kind of inflammatory response. But as I said, I always work in 80% focus, 20% party. So there is space for, there is space for foods that are that do, that are treats, but they should always be treated as a treat and an additional to food, but not instead of food. So, it's not going to be great if you're having packets of crisps and bars and chocolates instead of meals, because again, you're tired or you're fatigued. But these things can be part of your diet, but as long as they don't replace the food that you take, because obviously with all the conditions that are kind of out there, that it's important that everything you eat is as nourishing as it can possibly be with what you can kind of do at the time. I haven't really talked about hydration, but hydration is extremely important. So again, we're looking for, depending again on whether you've got IBD like Crohn's, where you have that big fluid loss, obviously you're going to have to put more fluids back in. But in general, the general population, you're using about 2 litres of fluid a day, and to sip it over the day. Don't just drink it as a glass over in one big gulp, because it'll just go straight to urine. You're trying to make sure that you're hydrating yourself, and especially if you've got gut issues, because again, you can put all this fibre in, but there's not enough fluid there, then potentially it'll not work. Fibre works like a sponge, so you have to draw fluid in, so you don't want the fluid all to go to urine. So it is, when I looked at the studies from Clinically Awesome, it is hard to eat healthy when you're tired, when you're fatigued, when you've got 4 kids to run after, but it's trying to eat the best when you can. And again, it is using things like frozen, pre-chopped, kind of like fruits and vegetables. If you're going to make a soup, just buying a bag of the chopped onions and turnip and carrot, you know, it's better to do that than not have the energy to peel it and chop it as well. So the advice is to generally consume a variety of foods from all the different food groups, eat regularly, kind of as best you can, aiming to have 5 fruits and vegetables a day if you can, aiming for starch carbohydrates if you can tolerate them, and really trying to eat food as food and trying to stay away from processed, because we do definitely know there is a link between the more processed a food is and potentially the harder it is on your body. So the Mediterranean style diet has been it's one of the diets that they all come back to. So when you look at people, when you look at studies for people like that've got thyroid issues, when you look at people that have IBS, when you look at people that have got, generally lots of the diet come back to the principles of the Mediterranean style diet. So it is about having, you know, as much colour as you can, and you know, there's benefits for having Mediterranean style diet for type 2 diabetes, for reducing cardiovascular disease, for reducing cancer, managing your inflammatory levels. So again, because it's based on whole grains, fish, legumes, nuts, seeds, olive oil, because of the colour in it, it's the one diet that there's lots of evidence out there for us to try to, because we know that the Mediterranean population tend to have a longer life, and we think it comes down to the style of food that they eat. Whereas as UK, we've kind of followed the American way of eating, you know, in that we eat quickly, we eat processed, whereas the Mediterranean style diet is going back to real food. So it's fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, beans, lentils and pulses, whole grain, unsaturated fats, fish, and it's reducing processed meats and processed foods and refined carbohydrates. So these are the kind of principles that, if we can, would be the best way to kind of aim towards. So kind of coming to an end, there was a couple of questions that kind of came in, and I just thought I would maybe kind of answer them. But again, if you have any questions after watching this today, then, you know, just give the message to Ellie, and Ellie will pass it on to me. Hopefully I can maybe answer it, or it may be that from this talk you think that you want to go deeper into one specific area, and we can maybe look at it in a bit more detail. But for example, there is such a fashion with gluten-free diet. So I've got a chronic condition like fibromyalgia, should you be gluten-free? So Sandra kind of asked that at the start there, and so there's maybe anecdotal evidence. The thing about gluten is it's quite a big molecule to digest, and we're eating much more gluten than maybe we would have eaten in the past. So whereas in the past we probably would have eaten much more potatoes, we would have moved more onto a kind of grain-based cereals. So we would have probably have eaten oats, we would have eaten more potatoes, but we've moved on to bread, we've moved on to processed cereals, crackers, wraps. So it does play a bigger part in our diet. Definitely if we've got celiac disease, it's something you have to completely avoid. We have people who come to me with gluten intolerances, and so myself, I can't tolerate a lot of gluten. My conditions are I've got PCOS, I've got IBS, and so potentially I know that if I'm extremely stressed, high gluten intake sets all my symptoms off. On a day-to-day basis, I probably could get away with a sandwich, but I couldn't get away with having bran flakes, a sandwich and pasta at night. You would just have to roll me down the hill. But I think what I would say is that if you think gluten's an issue, then like I've said already, monitor your intake, review your symptoms, take it out for 4 to 6 weeks, review your symptoms again and see if it has been a difference. And have your symptoms got better? Have they got worse? Have they got worse because now you're eating less fibre? Have they got worse because there's something in the gluten-free bread that you're reacting to? Gluten-free bread isn't a healthy thing to take. You're better off with sourdough spelt bread, or you're better off with, because the gluten-free bread, they have to put lots of different things into it to make it similar to bread. Or you might be better to do a gluten-free diet, but aiming it on oats, quinoa, buckwheat, rice noodles, rice, rather than artificial gluten-free products. And again, I get lots of people come to me. I've got a boy who's been diagnosed with celiac, and his diet's much worse now than it ever has been, because he's just doesn't trust food, and he just eats foods that say that they're gluten-free on it. But not all gluten-free foods are healthy, because you get cakes, you get biscuits, you get bars, but you can do it well. So do we all need to be gluten-free? No. Potentially, I think, as the way that we're living now, because we're under more stress, because we maybe had more exposure to antibiotics due to pollution, there's lots of things that can cause us to have symptoms, but quite often we blame a food. So I would say that no, not everybody needs to be gluten-free, but if you are, you want to make sure that you're doing it well and you're having as balanced a diet as possible. So somebody else asked, should I go meat-free? So we do know we should be more plant-based. We definitely know that for the environment, for our general health, we should have more plant-based foods in our diet. But meat does play a role in it. We do get good sources of iron, good sources of vitamin B12, good sources of zinc and selenium from meat itself. But I think potentially I would definitely watch your intake of red meat, because we do know it's linked with bowel cancer. We do know it's linked with heart disease. Potentially maybe having a couple of meat-free days a week. If you're going to use meat-free products, check, there's maybe not any ingredients in that you're going to react to, and potentially is it still going to be high enough in protein, or is it just full of chemicals? Definitely going for a leaner cut of meat, going for maybe potentially better quality, so maybe going for something like maybe if you can afford it, to go for something that's more organic, because a lot of the meat that we get is pumped full of things like protein powders to make it look better, to make it look bigger, for it to draw more water into it. So again, you don't have to be meat free, but I think what you want to do is to look at the quality of the meat that you're eating. And obviously be careful of things that are processed meats. So again, like if you're going to have a sausage, make sure you have a good quality sausage that is maybe about 98% meat in it, whereas you get other sausages that are only 40% meat, so they've got 60% of what, cotton wool, I'm not too sure. So you want to make sure that potentially you're eating the best that you can if you're going to eat meat as well. Somebody asked, should you take dietary supplements? It's for certain conditions, absolutely. So when people have celiac disease, quite often we'll put them on iron supplements and calcium. There may be issues for conditions potentially with gastroparesis, because you can't take in enough. So you might just need a general multivitamin, or you might need, again, supplemented with iron or vitamin B12. If somebody's on long-term omeprazole, you might need to take vitamin B12 as well. So there's reasons why people can take supplements. Lots of people take supplements as an insurance. I'll just take this multivitamin just in case. But quite often you just end up with expensive urine. You just pee all the water-soluble vitamins back out because your body can't hold on to them. And potentially it'll hold on to the fat-soluble vitamins, but you'll pass it the B vitamins, the vitamin C as well. So the only vitamin I would say that everybody needs to take is vitamin D, because we just, again, through pollution, through suntan lotion, through environment, we just don't get enough, and every cell in your body requires vitamin D. So it's completely up to yourself, but know why you're taking the supplement, and be careful, because just taking vast amounts of supplements can displace some other Vitamins, so if you take a lot of iron, it can knock off zinc. If you take a lot of zinc, it can knock off iron. So you just have to be careful that you're not making the situation worse. And again, long term, I don't know in 20 years' time whether we're going to be saying, oh, I can't believe we're taking all these vitamins and they weren't regulated. So, you know, and we don't know what the effect all these things can have together. So it's completely up to yourself. But again, take it for a while, see if you feel better. If you don't feel better, then maybe you don't need it. Other questions, should I take out nightshades? I've heard they're bad. So nightshades have had a bit of a rap. So what nightshades are they are certain vegetables that contain solanase in them. And so that's things like aubergines, tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, goji berries. They contain glucoalkaloids, and they have had a bad rap because they think that they're pro-inflammatory. However, looking at some of these studies, the studies that they were carried out to say that glucoalkaloids had pro-inflammatory response was they were not in humans, they were done in animals. In actual fact, when they looked at it again, some of the studies said they actually had anti-carcinogenic effects and anti-inflammatory. So currently there's no research to say that you should avoid nightshade fruits and vegetables. Some people I do know who have upset digestive systems, again, need to find that when we look at their food diary, there's maybe nightshades that are a problem. But I think it's important, I keep saying it's important to have diversity. So unless you feel that you really react to them, I wouldn't take them out unnecessarily. If you feel that they might be a cause of your inflammation, you know, take them out again for 4 to 6 weeks. Note in 4 to 6 weeks if you feel a difference. If not, you know, just kind of bring them back in as well. So it's you know, they were kind of good questions to answer. So Ellie was saying already that there's been quite a few workshops on sleep, on stress, on exercise. So again, food should be part of the whole combination. So it's important to look at your lifestyle factors. How active are you? What's your mental health like? How are you sleeping? You know, so it's about the whole combination, and you know, are the other things that need work on, rather than do I need to eliminate this food from my diet? And I know that with chronic fatigue, MS, ME, that exercise is difficult, and but it's doing what you can when you can, to what level that you can, to help with all the whole lifestyle factors. So what I want you to take away from this is really, if you're going to follow any specific diet, you need to do your research, make sure you get credible resources or sources of information. Speak to somebody about it. I know a lot of you will have spoke to doctors in the past and found that you maybe had it's maybe not been the best consultation, but you know, speak to you if you've got a stoma bag, speak to your stoma nurse or an IBD nurse, or you know, your GP, or you know, if it's something to do with sometimes dentists and pharmacists have kind of good information as well, or talk to people in one of your Facebook groups. So do all your research before you start doing something. Also look at how does that make my overall diet balance, and other things I need to consider. Do I need to consider my stress? Do I need to consider my sleep? Is that what's making me more tired rather than me having gluten as well? So that's it. Gosh, I spoke for 2 hours. That's heavy going. So I've got lots of resources. There's if you're looking to try any of these things, and I've got all the references as well. So Ellie will send that out to you. So any questions? So obviously we've just got yourself, Sandra, and you've just got yourself, Ellie. Is there anything that you wanted to specifically ask today? No, I've answered it all. I've
Thank
put
you.
everybody to
It was really, really good.
It's hard to know because it's such a, everybody's got to eat, but there's so many factors with having all these different chronic illnesses. There's so many factors that play into it. It has to be very, very specific to yourself, and that's the difficult part that comes with it. So it's hard for me to be specific. I have to be quite general and you know, and for you to pick the information that you think is relevant to yourself.
It was really refreshing to kind of acknowledge that chronic illness can mean that you end up with a bit of an unhealthy relationship with food. I know that, you know, particularly having spent so long like just vomiting everything, there is an element of like, I don't want to eat, I don't want to have to think about food, I don't want to worry about, is what I'm about to eat gonna come back out again, is it going to make me feel awful? You know, for a while I really dreaded feeling hungry and having to eat the next thing because I knew there'd be consequences afterwards. And there was an element of relief when the tube went in, because it took those decisions away from me, those choices and what have you away from me. And there's an element of like, oh gosh, at some point I'm going to have to go back to facing those mental challenges, and it's never been addressed. No one's ever said, you know, in all my gastro team and everything, no one's ever said, how have you coped with the, you know, with all of this must have been tough or anything like that. No one's ever said, how has that been, or do you need any support? And no one's suggested that at any point I'll get support with coming off the tube and back onto food. I have no idea what that'll look like. You know, it's kind of a, it's definitely taken its toll in terms of my relationship with food.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It'll be extremely daunting because really what they're doing now, there's so many factors. There's so many factors with it. It's not a pleasant thing, you know. You have adverse reactions to it, makes you feel sick, you're exhausted, you don't have the headspace for it. There's so many multifactorial things that come into it. So it's, when people come to me, it's always about what are the little things you could do that are not going to cause a whole load of extra stress on top of, because unless you have an issue with food, you've got no idea how difficult that it is to.
And I think there's a fear, particularly if you're a bit complex and the answers aren't immediately obvious. There's a fear that if you say, I'm struggling emotionally with food because of the symptoms I'm having, that then people will jump to the conclusion that you have an eating disorder. And actually it's the other way around. The difficulties you're having with food and giving you a disordered relationship with food, and that, you know, is understandable. But it's difficult to admit, I think, sometimes.
Because your conditions are giving you a disorder. It's not you've got a disorder that's giving you conditions. It's just, it's so it's for you and potentially people that have got gastroparesis or you know, and all the joy is taken out of it, and you're just, and it's a kind of waiting of, as in, is this going to come back up, or is it actually going to stay where it's meant to be? And so although you may be working, you're still thinking, well, I ate that sandwich, am I going to have to run off at a point? So it's extremely difficult. And I think people take for granted eating, taste, texture, which until it becomes an issue, it destroys all the pleasures, because everything in life is around food and drink, and
Yeah, we celebrate, we socialize, we commiserate, we alleviate boredom. Everything is food related. And all of a sudden, like, we went out last night because it was my husband's birthday. We went out for a celebratory dinner, and I just sat there at the table while everyone ate. And I looked like a total weirdo, you know, when everyone placed their orders, and she said, "What do you want?" And I was like, "Nothing. I'll just sit here."
I'm just gonna lick the steak.
Yeah. I'll just look really sadly at everyone else.
I know it is. Yes, so that's the first thing that you do. So that's emotionally difficult. So it is. It's so complex, and everybody's got an opinion. You know, I'm sure Sandra and Ellie, everybody's got an opinion on what you should be doing, or so and so tried this, and you're thinking, well, do you not think I would have tried that if I thought that was the answer? Yeah, and the thing is with, you know, when it's a disorder of your digestive system, you know, at the end of the day, we have to get nourishment in. It's different if you had a chronic condition that affected a leg, you know. Potentially, you know, you could walk on it, you could not walk on it, but at the end of the day, you can't survive without food and drink. So that's the kind of difficult part. So yeah, so it is so multi complex. But now what I just feel is there's been such a boom in craziness, but that's not to say that you shouldn't try it, but I just feel a lot of the time, and there was I don't know if you watched that documentary about the woman in Australia who hoodwinked lots of people into following this advice of a very, she said that she cured her cancer with this dietary manipulation, and she hadn't had cancer, and potentially all these people went on this very restrictive diet, and a couple of people died, not through the cancer but through the malnutrition. And it's so there's so many. That's why you have to be very careful and make sure you've done all your research, and you're not looking at the fanciness of somebody that looks well, that looks beautiful, that is seems to have had the magic bullet, and thinking, well, that could be me as well. But there's lots of people that prey on people that have got chronic conditions to sell a whole load of aloe vera juice and different vitamins and minerals that are very expensive and potentially may not make the situation any better. Yeah, so on that note, what I'll do is I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And if there's anything that comes back from this, then we can just pass on the inquiries, and potentially anybody that watches this video, if anybody wanted to have a consultation with myself, I potentially would offer a discount as well. So I'd offer a 10% discount for anybody who comes through chronically awesome. But that doesn't mean that people I can answer some general questions or inquiries if they want to contact me on Instagram or Facebook. So it's just Lesley Reid Nutritional Health is the kind of tag.
So, sorry, what's the name of your page, did you say?
So it's Lesley Reid Nutritional Health.
Nutritional.
Yeah.
I'll send out the links in the email.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, guys, well, listen, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and if there's any issues, just get back in contact with me, Ellie.
Brill, thank you so much.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.